Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. I was prompted by one of the comments made in the last Women of Marvel podcast to take a serious look at the numbers for both comics and trade paperbacks that Marvel is shipping, especially in 2018, but I did go back a little bit into 2017 as well, because the editor for The Unstoppable Wasp said they were sad to see that book go. They really didn't want to let it go, and so they put out a trade paperback, and it did so well that it showed them that they should bring this book back in the comics. So I wanted to look at those numbers and see what actually they would classify as doing well and not doing well. And so I decided not just to look at Unstoppable Wasp, but at a number of SJW heavy titles. I would say titles that would not be there in any kind of healthy market. Only in this ideological driven market would these books actually be out there, in my estimation. So to give you a quick rundown, what I'm looking at is the top 500 of comics that were shipped. And the thing is, a couple of caveats that have to go in there. We're looking at, for number one, these numbers vary wildly. We're talking anywhere from 100,000 units to 500,000 units shipped. But around 2 or 3, you usually settle in around 150,000 units shipped, which again isn't good for any kind of healthy market, but is your number ones and number twos and number threes for this current market. And if you go down to number 50, usually you peter out at around 35,000. So those are your earmarks. And I want to look at the numbers for these books. So Unstoppable Wasp, its last 2 issues of its previous run were in July and August of 2017. And in July, it was shipping around 7,400 units. Now, you also have to remember that these are units shipped, not units sold. So I would say the general rule of thumb would be you take off 1/3 of the actual number, then you'll get the actual number of units sold. So when it's around 7,500, we're talking about less than 5,000 books, I would say, actually bought by customers. And then in August, you have it dipping below 7,000, around 6,800. Now, I would say from this and a number of things that I'm going to cover here in a minute, that around 7,000 is your cancellation number. And that's units shipped, not actually units sold, remember. So this is what Marvel did, and it seems to be a pattern with Marvel. As soon as they canceled the series, they put out a trade paperback of the series, and what they do with this is specifically they're looking to bring back these titles by saying, look, the trade paperback did well. But this is sleight of hand, to say the least, because in specifically talking about this title, in specifically talking to the editor about what she was saying about bringing back the title, San Amanat said that who actually orders these books is usually library associations and parent associations, and they don't buy the book on the actual merit of the book, nor in actually being fans of any kind of the book. They buy it simply on a concept that is sent to them, and they look and read the concept, which I would say was probably a progressive concept, and they would buy the book based upon this concept. So they're actually basing on whether or not they should bring back a title for comic readers based upon sales to non-comic readers, to associations, library associations and parent associations who don't actually read the book, nor are sold the book on actually knowing what's in it, but just on a quote-unquote progressive statement of the concept. And what is the number for Unstoppable Wasp Volume 1 trade paperback? Because they put out 2 volumes. One was in August of 2017, and the other was in February of 2018. So, Unstoppable Wasp Volume 1 trade paperback, selling at $13 per unit, sold 1,400 copies. 1,400 copies. This is what Marvel is calling spectacularly well selling as a trade paperback. And Unstoppable Wasp Volume 2, which sold at $16, sold 767 units. This is what Marvel is calling a spectacular sale of trade paperbacks. And this is what they're hinging their numbers on to put out a new book for the actual comic book readers. Now, this is something that I would say would be pathetic, to say the least. And On top of that, you have a number of other Wasp and Ant-Man books coming out during the year of 2018. You have Wasp and Ant-Man Prelude to the Movie, which shipped, again, around 7,700 or 7,000 itself for number 2. And then you have a coloring book coming out that shipped around 600. I don't even know why they stuck that in there. It's so low. And then you have your Ant-Man and Wasp series, which sold basically around 13,000 to 14,000, which is twice as what the last Wasp itself actually sold. But you have to remember that these are the numbers that they're generating when they have a major movie out that's doing spectacularly well with this same title character. It's not the actual same character, but the same title of the character, and this is all they can pull together. And when they shipped their number 1 in, I do believe it was October of 2018, what were the numbers then? It was shipping at around 17,300. That's what they actually shipped. But you actually have to take into account the fact that they have multiple covers for the number 1, and Marvel is known to overship for number 1s. And what you do usually to look at the actual number that should have been shipped for your number 1, you look at the numbers for number 2 and number 3. And the numbers for number 2 and number 3 are around the same. They're around 9,000 units shipped, 9,500. So here you have a book which was canceled at less than 7,000. It was brought back because of spectacular numbers being sold of the trade paperback, which if you add both of the trade paperbacks together, you would get slightly over 2,000 units shipped. And then you have the series being brought back and hovering right at the get-go around 9,000 units, which is about 2,000 away from what usually they cancel a book at. So this is the state of Marvel right now. This is what is happening with Unstoppable Wasp. So I took these numbers from Wasp and I decided to look at some other SJW-driven titles. Now, if we look at America Chavez, it only had 2 titles coming out in 2018 before it was canceled, in January, February. In January, it was shipping around 7,300. And in February, its last issue shipped less than 7,000. It was around 6,500. And again, you see that that cancellation mark seems to be around 7,000. And then, not long after, they had their trade paperback for America Chavez come out, and it sold less than 1,000 units. Now, if we take that and combine it with what the editor said for the Unstoppable Wasp, which actually put out a trade paperback that sold 1,400 units, I would say their consideration of what is actually good for a trade paperback sale would be more than 1,000. Now, if you actually look at some of the other trade paperbacks, usually their shipping units actually hover around 300 to 400. That's it. And when you look at that, you could see why they would think that over 1,000 books actually sold was a success. But here's the thing. They're working off of so small of numbers, they're going out there and saying these things were a success and not actually looking at the numbers. They're saying these things were brought back because they were so successful in the trade paperbacks. But that success is only predicated on numbers that are so extremely low that no one else would actually see them as a success. You see what's going on here with Marvel. So going down the list, I wanted to look at Iceman as well. So Iceman, it shipped its last issues for its last volume in January, February, March of 2018. It was hovering at 11,000, 10,500 in those 3 issues. Now, Iceman has an asterisk next to it all over the place because Iceman was one of those books which Marvel was known to overship drastically. So if we're looking at these numbers and they're around 10,000 for its cancellation, if you look at the fact that it was always overshipped, you could say that it's probably around 3,000 books that they would overship, and it would probably be at the cancellation numbers. And then what did they do? They put out an Iceman trade paperback right after that, and it shipped less than 1,000 units, around 960. That's how many books it sold. So again, they did bring this title back, but I think it was more pressure than anything else. They probably took that number of about 1,000 units being sold for the trade paperback and said, it's doing okay. People really are demanding this back, so they brought it back. And they brought it back in the last closing months of 2018. Issue number 1 was shipping 38 to 39,000 units. Now there is a massive asterisk next to this one because even on this list there is an actual asterisk next to this one. Because for this title, Marvel specifically told all of its retailers that it was going to double ship every title that was actually ordered. Now, on top of that, we have multiple covers for this issue. And so if they double shipped everything, we're talking about an actual shipping number of units at around, we'll say, 19,000. And that's with your multiple covers. That's where it started at for its units shipped. Again, units shipped. And if you look at number 2 and number 3, what are the numbers for Iceman then? We're talking in number 2 at a little less than 13,000. Number 3 would be around 11,500. So it's going down there. And again, Iceman is known to be one of those books which was overshipped constantly and is probably still being overshipped right now. So if we're looking at cancellation numbers for Iceman being around 10,500 or 10,000, which are the last 2 issues from its last issue, and right now we're on issue number 3 and it's at 11,000, again, you can't even break 4 issues before you're hitting cancellation numbers for this book. Now the next one I want to look at, I'll do very quickly because I did look at this in another one of my videos. It's Squirrel Girl. Now Squirrel Girl is dancing at cancellation numbers all over the place. In the first of 2018, it was less than 10,000 units that were shipped. 9,600, around there for July. But Squirrel Girl is one of those things which they're constantly putting out trade paperbacks for. And these trade paperbacks are selling at around 300 issues. That's all they can actually sell for these. They're selling very, very low. But they're pushing this character all over the place. They have Marvel Rising in the comic books. They also have it in the cartoons. And they have a whole line of Squirrel Girl accessories and a line of Squirrel Girl tween novels that are coming out or have come out. So Marvel is pushing this character all over the place. And the thing is that at the end of 2018, we're looking at units sold for the comic of around 8,300. And again, if we're looking at normal numbers of cancellation from the Wasp and from America Chavez, we're looking at 7,000 as being the cancellation number for these books. And it's a little over 8,000 that are actually being shipped right now. And yet, Marvel is pushing this character all over the place, trying as desperately as they can to push this character. Now, the next one that I'm looking at actually gave me a little bit more of a hint into what is going on at Marvel, because I'm looking at Moon Girl, and at the beginning of 2018, it was shipping units less than 7,000. And if we're taking 7,000 to be our cancellation number, this thing should have been canceled a long time ago. It's around 6,600 units actually shipped at the first of the year. Now, the reason why it might actually still be being published is because during the middle of the year, they drove up those numbers to around 9,000. But now at the end of the year, it's back down to around 6,500. So lower than it was at the first of the year. How they actually drove up the numbers in the middle of the summer, I'm not actually sure. The pessimist in me says there was probably just a massive campaign of overshipping, and that was done so that they could try to promote this book, but obviously it's not working. But looking at this book, I would say that because of the numbers for this book and a number of other things that have been said by other people who were writing this book and writing other books and editing other books, it seems to me that Marvel is sectioning off its books in a certain way. Now, we already know from what has been said by Marvel editors that they section it off so that editors deal with specific kinds of books. That is to say, one editor deals with all X-Men books, another editor deals with all Avengers books. And that would include, things like Submariner would fall under Avengers, Rogue and Gambit would fall under X-Men. But I would say it's probably subdivided in another way as well. You probably have age categories for these books. And I would say Moon Girl is your preteens or lower, and that's who they're trying to target with this, and that's their audience. And that has actually been stated by people working on Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur. And you have Sana Amanat saying that things like Marvel Rising is actually for your preteens as well. And you have people like C.B. Cebulski saying things like The Runaways are a teen drama. Specifically, that's the phrase he used. It is a teen drama. So I would say these are sectioned off according to who they are targeted towards, and since Moon Girl is targeted towards the very young, they're giving it a little bit of a break, besides the fact that they drove up the numbers, even though it's below 7,000 shipping. But this thing is going to be canceled really soon. Now, talking about Runaways, of course, the numbers for Runaways they're actually a little better than most of the other books. We're talking in January, they're shipping around 14,000. And at the end of the year, they're shipping around 10 to 11,000. In October, they shipped around 10,800. In November, around 11,000. So hovering around 11,000 at the end of the year, which is better than the other books, to be sure. Certainly not good compared to any other thing in Marvel, even today. But here is one of those books which they're trying to promote all over the place again. Now, as I said, C.B. Cebulski specifically called this book a teen drama. Not a superhero book, he called it a teen drama. And they're hovering around 11,000 in their actual shipping numbers, but they're putting out a whole bunch of trade paperbacks for this during the course of it actually running out. And again, you have to remember that here is a book which should be supported by the show which is being put out, which is based upon this book, and yet their numbers are dancing around 10,000 shipped, and that is only slightly away, a couple of thousand units away from being canceled. And the last one I want to look at is Hawkeye. Well, fake Hawkeye, which would be Kate Bishop. And it was actually selling at the 1st of 2018 in its last 3 issues around 12,000 before it was canceled. Then they put out a whole bunch of trade paperbacks, and then they didn't actually bring back Kate Bishop, but it has been said by people like Sana Amanat and these editors that were doing the podcast that West Coast Avengers is really just a Hawkeye book. It's really just a Kate Bishop book with a bunch of other people thrown in. So if we look at the numbers for West Coast Avengers, it starts off fairly good, around 34,500, fairly good for these books. And then for number 2, it dips down to 24,000. So it's not actually one of those books that was prompted to have a high number by things like multiple covers or by overshipping, but I'm sure there was a little bit of that going on. And right now we're looking at numbers of around 22,000 that it's hovering at the end of the year. And the reason why I wanted to look at this one specifically was because this is what seems to be happening with Marvel. This is what seems to be happening with its books, where it's going to have to cancel a lot of these books really soon. They're actually falling back on what seems to be an old Marvel trope. It's certainly one that I remember from the 90s and the 80s. If they have characters which they can't actually put out in their own book, they try and it's not working, what do? They usually bring back a bunch of the characters that are not selling well into a team. Now, that doesn't make any real sense to anybody else, but it seems to be something that Marvel has done for a long time now. And this is what is going to happen, I think, with many of these books. A lot of these books within the next year are going to be canceled. Their numbers are just so low that they have to be canceled. And what they're going to do is they're going to bring back these characters in group form, and they're going to push them into things like the Champions. Because if you look for the numbers for the Champions, they're not spectacularly well, but at the 1st of 2018, they're shipping around 20,000 units, and at the end of 2018, we're talking 20 to 18,000 units. So it's pretty steady, and it's actually fairly high compared to what most of these books are actually selling at or being shipped at. But this is what's going to happen, I think, in 2018. We had 2017 where we got rid of all of these characters that were actually trying to replace our original characters. We got rid of Jane Foster's Thor, we got rid of Amadeus Cho Hulk, we got rid of all of these characters, and they put them into the Champions. And now, in 2018, you have these other books, which, like Wasp and Iceman and Hawkeye and America Chavez, they're all getting pushed into group books or group projects, like Marvel Rising, of course, and this is what's going to happen in 2019. I would say that most of these books will be canceled by themselves, and they will come back into a form which is a team book, or even if it's not on the title as a team book, it's going to be a team book, and this is what's going to happen. So I would say we are having an effect on these sales and pushing these things into a corner, and that we are making some headway. It's not any significant headway unless you look at it in a yearly fashion, but we're actually making some headway in trying to get these books out of there, in trying to get Marvel to actually publish things that have merit. So I know this was probably kind of boring going over the numbers, but I actually pulled out a lot of information that I'm going to be using for the next year on these numbers, so I thought I'd do a video about it. So if I gave you anything new to think about, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about these numbers which are so low that people with Indiegogo campaigns in their basement are actually outselling Marvel. All right, I'll see you later. Bye.